Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey through the restless nights of the Victorian era, where insomnia wasn't just a personal struggle, it was an epidemic. Imagine a time when sleep was something to be obsessed over, yet often it seemed out of reach. You'd think that the Victorian upper classes, with all their riches, would sleep soundly in their grand beds, but instead they tossed and turned through the night, much like the working class. It was an age where the pursuit of sleep was as intense as the pursuit of wealth or status. You're probably thinking, how did they manage to live like that? Well, the answers are more bizarre and fascinating than you might imagine. They turned to potions, strange rituals, and early medical techniques, hoping for that elusive good night's rest. But let's be honest, many of these methods were just as likely to keep them awake as they were to lull them into slumber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to post your location and the time. I'm curious where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the bustling streets of Victorian England, sleep was not merely a physiological necessity, it was a pursuit filled with ritual and obsession. If you lived in this era, whether you were a factory worker in London or a wealthy aristocrat, insomnia wasn't just an inconvenience, it was part of life. In fact, this was a time when the average person slept significantly less than we do today, and that wasn't just because of the industrial demands or lack of comfort. It was also due to the alarming misconceptions about sleep itself. At the heart of it all was a growing understanding of sleep's importance, but coupled with that was an almost comical amount of confusion. You see, while today we have a better grasp of the science behind sleep, in the Victorian era, doctors and philosophers were only beginning to comprehend how our bodies actually rested and repaired themselves during sleep. Theories about sleep were often rooted in some highly suspect ideas. For instance, some believed that sleep was simply a necessary pause for the body's spiritual energy to regenerate. Others thought that sleep disorders might be caused by the alignment of the stars. The Victorian approach to insomnia was deeply tied to their social and medical beliefs. There was no magic bullet for a good night's sleep, but numerous remedies emerged. Some were harmless, like warm milk or gentle herbal teas. Others were far more dubious, such as the consumption of opium or laudanum drugs that could both knock you out and leave you dependent. But this fascination with sleep wasn't limited to the working class or the elite. In fact, it was woven into the fabric of Victorian life across all strata of society. People of every social class struggled with sleep disorders, often attributing their lack of rest to everything from the grind of factory labor to the pressures of maintaining a proper household. This was an age that thrived on expectations about work, about appearances, and yes, even about sleep. To fall asleep at the wrong time, or worse, to not sleep at all, was a source of anxiety and guilt. In the next section, we'll look at the kinds of remedies people turned to when their sleep was elusive, from potions brewed in apothecaries' shops to more radical ideas that were often more dangerous than helpful. As we continue our journey through Victorian nights, let's dive into the strange and varied remedies that people turned to when they couldn't catch a wink of sleep. These weren't your typical over-the-counter pills you might find at the pharmacy today. No, the Victorians had their own brand of sleep solutions, some bizarre, others frighteningly dangerous, but all wrapped up in the frantic desire for rest. We're talking about potions, pills, and even gadgets that were supposed to induce sleep. One of the most popular remedies at the time was opium, often consumed in the form of laudanum. The drug was considered a catch-all solution for everything from chronic pain to insomnia, and it was readily available. You could walk into most pharmacies and buy it with little more than a nod from the shopkeeper. In fact, laudanum was so ubiquitous that it became as common as a bottle of aspirin would be today, except, of course, it carried with it the very real risk of addiction. It was easy to get hooked, and many found themselves relying on it just to sleep through the night. The soothing qualities of opium made it irresistible, but it didn't take long for the downside to emerge. Side effects like dependency, withdrawal, and delirium were common, and yet the widespread use of this substance continued for decades. The curious thing about laudanum and many other Victorian sleep aids is that they weren't just available to the wealthy. Working-class families often used these substances too, though they were sometimes forced to make do with cheaper, less potent versions. In fact, laudanum became so deeply ingrained in Victorian society that it was used to soothe not just insomnia, but a host of other ailments, including anxiety and depression. The social acceptance of using opiates to manage everyday problems only deepened the cycle of addiction. Historians still argue whether this widespread use of opium was a deliberate attempt by pharmaceutical companies to create lifelong customers, or simply a symptom of the time's lack of understanding about addiction. If you weren't a fan of opiates, the Victorians had a variety of herbal remedies to offer, many of which sound oddly familiar to us today. For example, valerian root, still a popular sleep aid in modern times, was often used to help induce sleep. The herbal remedy was so revered that it was used not just by those suffering from insomnia, but also by those looking to manage anxiety and stress. Its effects weren't immediate, but over time, the calming properties helped people wind down. However, unlike the heavy-handed approach of laudanum, valerian root was much less likely to cause dependency. Yet, even with herbal remedies, many people found that sleep still evaded them. The idea of curing insomnia with a magic cure was just as appealing then as it is now, and some went to great lengths to find the perfect solution. Some of these solutions were anything but herbal. The Victorians were obsessed with the idea of devices and methods that would ensure sleep. One such device was the sleeping mask, a contraption designed to block out the light and induce sleep, though its effectiveness was questionable at best. This early sleep mask was essentially a leather or fabric covering that wrapped around your eyes and was secured with straps. While it didn't have the sleek, modern feel of a sleep mask from the 21st century, it served the same purpose, blocking out the light, which at the time was a significant issue. Gas lamps and streetlights were common, and they often caused a disruption to the natural sleep cycle, especially for those living in the cities. If you lived in the country, perhaps you were lucky enough to be surrounded by natural darkness, but city dwellers had no such luck. And so, the sleeping mask was born, though most people probably found it more uncomfortable than helpful. Now, let's talk about the more unusual methods. Have you ever heard of the sleeping chair? It wasn't just a comfy chair you'd sink into after a long day. It was an actual piece of furniture designed with sleep in mind. These chairs, often made of padded leather, were built to help induce a relaxed state and were sometimes even equipped with heating elements to soothe aching muscles. The idea was simple. By providing a comfortable environment, you could naturally drift off. But even with all this comfort, many people found themselves staring at the ceiling for hours, waiting for sleep to come. After all, sleep isn't just about comfort. It's about the body and mind finding peace in a world that was anything but peaceful. But what about something a bit more extreme? Some Victorians turned to electricity, of all things, to help them sleep. It may sound strange to us today, but in the late 19th century, electricity was the latest wonder. Early experiments in electricity as a medical treatment were gaining popularity, and some believed that electrical currents could help stimulate the nervous system and induce sleep. Devices like the electric belt were marketed as sleep aids, and people actually believed that shocking themselves into sleep could be a legitimate cure. The electric belt was supposed to work by sending a mild electric current through the body, which was thought to relax the muscles and nerves. There was no scientific evidence to back up these claims, but the promise of a quick fix was enough to make these devices incredibly popular. The most peculiar remedy might be the use of hypnotism, which had recently been discovered in the Victorian period. Hypnosis was first practiced as a form of entertainment, but quickly made its way into the medical field. Many believed that hypnosis could cure all sorts of ailments, including insomnia. The idea was that if a person could be put into a relaxed, trance-like state, their mind would be open to suggestion, and sleep would come naturally. This was somewhat effective for some individuals, but it wasn't a universal solution. Plus, being hypnotized to sleep doesn't sound like the most restful option, does it? Despite all of these efforts, some of which we still use today, albeit in more regulated forms, the Victorian struggle with sleep continued. Whether it was opium, valerian root, or the electric belt, the quest for a good night's rest was a constant in a world that seemed to never stop moving. And even though we have much better sleep science today, there's something deeply relatable about their struggle. Everyone, at one point or another, has stared at the ceiling in frustration, wishing for the sweet embrace of sleep. It's a timeless issue, isn't it? The debates and trials of Victorian insomnia treatments remain fascinating, offering a window into a time when medical knowledge was still in its infancy. But there's also a strange comfort in knowing that, for all our advancements, sleep is still just as elusive for many of us today as it was for those in the 19th century. Now that we've explored the bizarre and sometimes dangerous remedies that were used to treat insomnia in Victorian times, let's shift gears and take a closer look at the science, or rather, the lack of it behind sleep during this period. In the 19th century, the understanding of sleep was rudimentary at best. Many of the ideas about sleep that we now know to be completely wrong were widely accepted back then, and this created the perfect storm for an epidemic of sleepless nights. At this time, science was just beginning to scratch the surface of understanding the human body, and sleep was no exception. Early on, it was believed that sleep was simply a pause in the body's activity, a kind of reset button for the brain. People thought of sleep much like the rest of the day, as something that could be scheduled and controlled. There was a popular belief that sleep was a sign of weakness or laziness, and the Victorians, with their pull yourself up by the bootstraps attitude, often treated insomnia as a moral failing. If you couldn't sleep, it was your fault for not trying hard enough to clear your mind. The idea that the brain needed rest and repair during sleep was not fully understood yet. Historians still argue whether this lack of understanding contributed to the social stigma around insomnia during the Victorian era. Was it that people didn't want to admit they were struggling, or did they genuinely believe they could fix it with the right remedies? Either way, the misconception that sleep was a simple, controllable act made it harder for people to take their insomnia seriously and seek out effective treatments. But it wasn't just the common folk who misunderstood sleep. Doctors, too, were largely in the dark. For much of the 1800s, physicians were still working off the ancient Greek and Roman theories about the body, which had very little to say about sleep disorders. In fact, the idea that the brain needed rest during sleep wasn't widely accepted until the late 19th century. Physicians were far more likely to prescribe tonics, potions, and physical treatments, hoping to cure sleep troubles without any real understanding of what was going on in the brain. The idea that sleep could be understood through a scientific lens began to take shape with the rise of psychiatry and neurology. This was a time when medical professionals began to focus more on the brain and its connection to behavior, including sleep. Dr. Behavior, William Gull, one of the leading physicians of the time, was among the first to consider that insomnia might be a symptom of underlying psychological issues rather than simply a physical ailment. He began exploring sleep disturbances in relation to mental health, and while his theories weren't perfect, they laid the groundwork for the understanding of insomnia that would come later. But the real turning point in understanding sleep came with the development of the first sleep laboratories in the early 20th century, which happened long after the Victorian era had ended. Still, the groundwork for these advancements was laid by Victorian doctors like Gull, who attempted to categorize sleep disorders and connect them to specific psychological and physical conditions. He was among the first to suggest that insomnia could be related to a person's mental state, rather than just poor habits or physical health problems. For most of the Victorian public, however, this understanding was a long way off. It wasn't until the end of the 19th century that more rigorous scientific inquiries into sleep were conducted. In fact, the first sleep studies were still in their infancy when the Victorian era came to a close. What we know about sleep today, including the importance of REM cycles, the relationship between sleep and memory consolidation, and the role of sleep in physical and emotional health, would have been completely foreign concepts to most Victorians. They were just beginning to realize that sleep wasn't a simple, natural phenomenon, but rather a complex, multifaceted process that could go awry in countless ways. In the next section, we'll explore how these growing understandings of sleep led to the creation of sleep clinics and specialized treatments for insomnia, bringing with them the promise of a more scientifically informed approach to overcoming sleepless nights. But for now, let's pause and reflect on how, despite all their efforts and good intentions, the Victorians were still trying to figure out what we now consider basic sleep science. Funny how a problem as universal as insomnia could have been so complicated in an age of progress, isn't it? As we move further into the realm of Victorian sleep treatments, let's take a closer look at the evolving landscape of remedies during this time. It's one thing to be aware of the problem insomnia, but quite another to find a solution that works. The Victorians, like people today, were desperate for rest. And so, as new treatments emerged, society scrambled to try anything that promised a good night's sleep. However, what they found was a mixed bag of results, some of which were effective, while others were. Well, let's just say they didn't do much except add to the confusion. In Victorian times, the search for a cure for insomnia was not unlike the search for the Holy Grail. A multitude of tonics, pills, and potions were advertised to bring relief, but many of them, unfortunately, had little to no scientific backing. Yet the very fact that these remedies were so widely popular reveals a great deal about the desperation that accompanied insomnia during the period. One of the most common treatments was the use of herbal remedies. Many people turned to nature for a cure, and certain herbs became the go-to options for those seeking relief from their sleepless nights. Valerian root, for example, was a popular remedy during this period. Valerian is a plant with a long history of medicinal use, believed to have sedative effects. It was said to calm the nervous system and relax the body, which is why many considered it a solution for those troubled by insomnia. Some people brewed valerian root into a tea, while others took it in the form of a tincture. The results were mixed. While some reported experiencing a sense of relaxation and improvement in their sleep, others found it ineffective. But what can you expect when your primary source of sleep science is word of mouth and old wives' tales? But herbal remedies weren't always enough to guarantee a good night's rest. Enter the world of medicinal concoctions, potions, and elixirs that promised the kind of deep sleep most could only dream of. One of the most notorious and widely used remedies during this time was laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol. Laudanum was both a painkiller and a sedative, and it became incredibly popular as a treatment for insomnia. In fact, it was often prescribed for a wide range of ailments, from chronic pain to digestive issues to sleep problems. The Victorians believed that the opium in laudanum would calm the nervous system, allowing a person to drift off to sleep more easily. For many, it worked temporarily. However, the problem was that laudanum was highly addictive, and over time, many users developed a dependency on the drug. In fact, addiction to laudanum became so widespread that it was often referred to as laudanum addiction, and it was one of the darkest chapters in Victorian medical history. The rise of laudanum use also points to another problem of the time: the lack of regulation in the pharmaceutical industry. Anyone could walk into a drugstore and purchase laudanum, often without a prescription or any real medical oversight. The idea that a powerful drug could be so easily obtained was unsettling, and its long-term effects were not fully understood. As a result, many people found themselves caught in a cycle of use and dependency, never truly solving their insomnia but rather masking it with a dangerous and addictive substance. Even some of the wealthiest and most influential people of the time, including famous writers and intellectuals, were known to have used laudanum to help them sleep. But laudanum wasn't the only option. If the opiates were too much, some people turned to alcohol in more moderate doses. While excessive drinking wasn't exactly a healthy solution, many Victorians believed that a little brandy or wine before bed could help calm the nerves and promote sleep. Alcohol was often mixed with herbs to create sleep tonics, offering a gentler alternative to opium. But just like laudanum, this was not without its risks. The heavy consumption of alcohol could lead to its own set of health problems, including liver damage, dependency, and, ironically, more sleep disturbances due to the withdrawal effects that accompanied stopping its use. It wasn't all drugs and potions, though. For some, the solution was a more scientific approach. As we discussed earlier, the understanding of sleep was still in its infancy, but that didn't stop a handful of ambitious Victorian doctors from experimenting with new methods to combat insomnia. One of the more curious treatments came in the form of electrical devices. The use of electricity was just beginning to take off during the Victorian era, and the medical community was eager to harness its potential. Some doctors believed that electrical stimulation could help calm the nervous system, making it easier for people to fall asleep. And so, devices like the electro-sleep machine were invented. These machines would administer low-voltage electric shocks to the body, often through metal plates attached to the skin. The idea was that the gentle shocks would relax the muscles and nerves, making it easier for a person to fall into a deep sleep. But as you can imagine, this method was anything but comforting. The experience was uncomfortable, to say the least, and the success rate was questionable at best. However, it was an early experiment in what would eventually become a more scientifically grounded field: electrotherapy. If all else failed, there was always hypnosis. The practice of hypnotism became somewhat fashionable during the Victorian era. and many people sought out hypnotists to help them with a range of issues, including insomnia. The idea was that by putting a person into a relaxed, trance-like state, they could bypass the conscious mind and access the deeper subconscious regions of the brain. Once in this state, the hypnotist would suggest that the patient fall asleep, guiding them toward a restful night. While the results varied, hypnosis did provide some with temporary relief from their sleepless nights. It was one of the more peculiar and less harmful treatments, but its effectiveness remained uncertain, and it was hardly a foolproof solution. All these remedies, the herbal, the medicinal, the electrical, represent the Victorian attempt to grapple with the complexities of sleep. While their methods were primitive by today's standards, they were a testament to the lengths people were willing to go to find rest. The Victorians were stuck between superstition and the budding sciences of psychology and neurology. They had no idea that the understanding of sleep would evolve into the sophisticated field we know today, one that incorporates everything from sleep studies to cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. In fact, as we'll explore next, it wasn't until the turn of the 20th century that sleep research began to take a more scientific shape. For the Victorians, however, the search for sleep was more than a medical pursuit. It was a reflection of the stresses of the time, the pressures of industrialization, the demands of society, and the struggle to keep up with the fast-paced changes of the world left many feeling exhausted, both physically and mentally. No matter how many potions or devices were invented, sleep was still an elusive creature, just out of reach. As we continue exploring the world of sleep in Victorian times, it's impossible to ignore one of the most remarkable and, frankly, disturbing sleep aids that became widespread during this period: opiates. Among the many concoctions available for purchase, one in particular stood out for its prevalence and dangerous popularity: laudanum. The story of laudanum is not just a tale of a sleep remedy, but a saga of addiction, societal ignorance, and the desperate attempts of a generation to solve the mystery of sleepless nights. Laudanum, a potent mix of opium and alcohol, was hailed as a miracle drug. It could calm nerves, soothe pain, and most importantly, help a person fall asleep. For the Victorians, sleep was both an essential respite from their grueling daily routines and a luxury many simply couldn't afford. As the pace of life quickened during the Industrial Revolution, with its long hours of factory work and endless societal pressures, many found themselves unable to shut their eyes at night. This growing epidemic of sleeplessness opened the door to the widespread use of opiates. For the wealthy, laudanum was as common as tea, with bottles of it easily accessible from local apothecaries. It wasn't just a cure for insomnia, it was an all-purpose solution. It was used to treat everything from anxiety and depression to chronic pain, digestion problems, and even as a means to quiet babies and children. Doctors, whose understanding of addiction and substance abuse was rudimentary at best, often prescribed laudanum without any real regard for its dangers. In fact, it was so widely accepted that it wasn't unusual for even the most esteemed members of society, including intellectuals and famous writers, to rely on it. The sad irony of laudanum was that while it provided temporary relief, it often brought far worse consequences. People found themselves becoming increasingly dependent on the drug, needing larger doses to achieve the same effects. This created a vicious cycle. The more they used it to sleep, the more they needed to function during the day. Withdrawal symptoms could be severe, and for many, the addiction became their new prison. The idea that laudanum was a quick fix for insomnia was so ingrained in Victorian society that few questioned the long-term consequences of its use. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of opiates in the Victorian era was a deliberate attempt by the medical community to create long-term dependency, or whether it was simply a result of the era's ignorance about the dangers of addiction. Either way, what began as a simple remedy for sleeplessness soon morphed into a widespread public health crisis. While the elite continued their use of laudanum in the comfort of their drawing rooms, the working class, too, found solace in its promise of a peaceful night's sleep. Unfortunately, for them, access to medical care was more limited, and many suffered in silence, addicted and unaware of the long-term damage they were doing to their bodies. The dangers of laudanum were not immediately apparent to the public, but over time, stories of addiction, mental breakdowns, and even deaths began to surface. This raised questions, but the lack of understanding about drug dependence made it difficult for Victorians to connect the dots. What began as a common remedy for pain and sleeplessness slowly became an enigma, a fix for an ailment that only led to more suffering. Interestingly, laudanum was not the only opiate-based remedy circulating during the Victorian period. Another infamous preparation, known as Godfrey's cordial, was marketed as a soothing tonic for children, designed to ease their teething pain and help them sleep. Its ingredients? Opium and alcohol, of course. The Victorians seemed blissfully unaware of the dangers of such concoctions. If anything, these substances were considered signs of advancement in medicine, tools of comfort and relief. It wasn't until later in history that the medical community began to understand the true impact of addiction and its connection to the widespread use of opiates. But what if laudanum wasn't the solution for everyone? After all, not everyone could afford such luxuries, and there were many who were desperate for anything that would help them sleep without the dependence on such dangerous substances. In fact, many people turned to less powerful sleep aids, including alcohol, which also became a popular remedy for insomnia. Like laudanum, alcohol was easily accessible and readily prescribed. Doctors often recommended a nightly nip of whiskey or brandy to calm the nerves and ease a troubled mind. While alcohol didn't carry the same level of risk as opiates, it was still a double-edged sword. Excessive drinking could lead to a range of health issues, from liver damage to depression, not to mention more sleep disturbances. Perhaps the most ironic aspect of all these Victorian sleep cures was that, in the pursuit of rest, people often created more problems than they solved. The more they tried to quiet their racing minds and restless bodies, the more they found themselves tangled in a web of dependencies, each one harder to escape than the last. But there were those, both in the medical community and beyond, who saw the limitations of these treatments and sought to find alternative ways to cure insomnia. Some looked to nature, while others turned to the latest advancements in medical science. And though many of these treatments didn't work, some would go on to influence the future of sleep medicine, paving the way for the sleep research we now take for granted. As we move forward, we'll examine how these early sleep remedies influenced the development of more modern sleep practices and how the dawn of the 20th century finally led to a better understanding of insomnia. But before we get there, let's take a moment to reflect on the peculiar nature of the Victorian approach to sleep. Was it that they were simply too desperate to rest? Or did the solutions they sought reflect a deeper unease about the pressures of their rapidly changing world? Whatever the reason, the quest for sleep in Victorian times offers a fascinating glimpse into how we've always struggled, in one way or another, to find peace in the night. As we continue to navigate the strange and complex world of Victorian sleep remedies, it's impossible to overlook the role that spirituality and religion played in the quest for a good night's rest. In an age where the boundaries between faith, medicine, and the supernatural were often blurred, people turned not only to pills and potions but also to prayers, rituals, and divine interventions in their search for sleep. For many, insomnia was not simply a physical ailment but a spiritual struggle, and so they sought solace in the comforting arms of religion. Sleep was seen by some as a form of divine gift, something bestowed upon those who were in harmony with God and nature. The belief was that if you were in the right spiritual state, sleep would come to you naturally, almost effortlessly. However, if you were unable to sleep, it was sometimes interpreted as a sign that your mind or soul was in turmoil, out of balance, or disconnected from divine will. This belief, of course, didn't do much to help those who were suffering from genuine insomnia, but it did offer a kind of solace, a spiritual framework for understanding the problem. The Victorians turned to their faith, hoping that by aligning themselves with God's will, they could restore peace to their restless minds and bodies. One of the most common spiritual remedies for insomnia involved prayer. People would turn to the Bible and recite passages or prayers designed to calm the soul and ease the mind. Psalms, in particular, were often seen as powerful tools for achieving restful sleep. Psalms like, "The Lord is my shepherd," Psalm 23, or "I will lie down and sleep in peace," Psalm 4. 8 were comforting verses that encouraged the faithful to trust in God's protection and embrace the peace He offered. These verses were often read aloud or silently repeated as a mantra before bed. For those who couldn't sleep, the recitation of these prayers was thought to invite God's blessing and help them find rest. But it wasn't just the Bible that offered comfort. The Victorians were also deeply fascinated by the power of rituals. Religious rituals, like lighting a candle or saying a prayer before bed were thought to bring peace to a troubled mind. Some people believed that keeping a sacred object close to them while they slept, such as a crucifix, a blessed relic, or a rosary, would ward off evil spirits and promote peaceful sleep. The idea that supernatural forces could influence sleep was common during this period, and many people found comfort in the belief that divine protection was only a prayer away. As the Victorian era progressed, spiritualism began to rise in popularity, and with it came a growing interest in seances, mediums, and other practices that sought to communicate with the deceased. Some Victorians believed that sleep could be a way to connect with the spiritual world, and many sought help from spiritualists and mediums to address their insomnia. They believed that restless spirits or dark forces could be causing their sleep problems, and so they turned to seances to ask for guidance or release. This, of course, was not a mainstream treatment, but it did gain traction among certain segments of society. Spiritualism became an avenue for those desperate for relief, hoping that a connection with the afterlife would restore the peace they so desperately needed. But what happens when prayer, ritual, and the supernatural don't provide the answers? The Victorians also turned to more structured forms of spiritual guidance, including counseling from religious leaders. Many clergymen and pastors were seen as the ultimate authority on mental and spiritual well-being, and they offered advice on how to overcome insomnia through faith and devotion. It wasn't uncommon for people suffering from sleeplessness to seek out pastoral counseling, hoping that their insomnia might be resolved through prayer and spiritual healing. This approach reflected the broader Victorian belief that the mind, body, and spirit were interconnected, and healing required a holistic approach that included both medical and spiritual intervention. Interestingly, while these spiritual methods didn't provide a cure for everyone, they played a significant role in shaping how people viewed sleep. In an age when scientific explanations for sleep disorders were still in their infancy, the idea that spiritual health could influence physical health became deeply ingrained in Victorian culture. The search for sleep was, in many ways, a reflection of a deeper existential struggle, a desire for peace, for meaning, and for connection to something greater than oneself. Sleep, in this context, was not just a physical act of resting, it was a spiritual experience, and the quest to solve insomnia became intertwined with the quest for spiritual fulfillment. As the century drew to a close, the focus on the spiritual aspects of sleep began to wane in favor of more scientific and medical approaches. The burgeoning field of psychology and neurology began to gain traction, and with it came a more rational understanding of sleep. But for many Victorians, the idea of using prayer, rituals, and faith to solve their sleep problems remained deeply comforting, even if it wasn't always effective. It reflected a time when faith in the supernatural was still very much alive, and when the boundaries between science and religion were far less defined than they are today. The rise of scientific understanding and sleep medicine in the 20th century would eventually render these spiritual methods obsolete, but they were an essential part of the Victorian struggle to understand and conquer insomnia. For many, these practices provided a much-needed sense of hope and peace, even when the science didn't have all the answers. And perhaps, in the end, that was the most important remedy of all, the belief that, with the right spiritual connection, rest could be found. In the next section, we'll look at how the Industrial Revolution shaped not only the social structure of Victorian society, but also the very nature of sleep itself. As factories rose and the demands of the modern world grew, sleep began to be viewed not just as a biological necessity, but as something that could be regulated, scheduled, and controlled. As we continue to uncover the strange and varied ways the Victorians approached insomnia, we now turn our attention to the profound impact the Industrial Revolution had on sleep. This was a period of rapid change, and with that change came a new set of challenges, not just in the work environment, but also in the way people slept. The rise of factories, long work hours, and the relentless drive for productivity all contributed to a shift in the way sleep was viewed and experienced during this time. In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, the majority of people in Britain lived in rural areas. Sleep patterns were largely dictated by the natural rhythms of the day. People would wake with the sunrise and sleep after the sunset. But as the Industrial Revolution picked up speed, many people moved to the cities in search of work. This marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in both the physical environment and the mental landscape of sleep. No longer were people's rest cycles tied to the natural world, but to the relentless demands of the factory. The factory system brought with it a rigid schedule: early mornings, long hours of monotonous labor, and late nights of exhausting work. Factory owners saw their workers as units of productivity, and their ability to sleep was often compromised in the name of efficiency. Shift work became a reality for many, and this disrupted the body's natural circadian rhythm. People who once had a natural sense of when to rest and when to work now found themselves subject to the whims of their employer's timetable. For many, this shift led to what we now understand as sleep deprivation, but at the time the connection wasn't yet clear. In the Victorian cities, the streets were lit by gas lamps, and the noise of industry never ceased. The sound of machines, the clanging of metal, the hum of street traffic, all these modern developments made it difficult for city dwellers to find a quiet, dark space to sleep. The very environment was working against them, and even if they had the time to rest, it was hard to block out the constant hum of progress. Historians still debate whether this was a unique feature of the Industrial Revolution or whether it was just another symptom of the larger forces of modernization that affected societies around the world. Did the industrial era, with its mechanization and urbanization, usher in a new type of sleeplessness, one that was driven not by the individual's internal struggles, but by the external forces of society itself? One could argue that the Victorians were the first to experience this widespread form of sleep disturbance as a result of industrialization, and that the consequences of this shift still echo in our modern lives. For the working class, there were few solutions to the sleep problems brought on by the factory. After all, what were they supposed to do when they were exhausted from the rigors of long hours, the harsh demands of their employers, and the unrelenting noise and light of the city? As the factory system grew, so did the number of people struggling to sleep. They tried many of the same remedies we've already discussed: herbal teas, potions, and even opiates, but they were rarely as effective as they hoped. In fact, many workers suffering from sleep deprivation found that no amount of laudanum or valerian root could ease the effects of the grueling workday. Even for the wealthier classes, sleep was becoming a rare commodity. Many aristocrats and upper-class Victorians struggled with sleep disorders, but the nature of their insomnia was often tied to different stressors: mental exhaustion, social pressures, and the constant anxiety of keeping up appearances. While the working class battled fatigue from physical labor, the wealthy faced their own form of mental fatigue. Their sleep struggles were not necessarily caused by overwork, but by the societal expectations placed upon them. In both cases, the Industrial Revolution had created an environment where sleep, once a simple and natural act, had become a luxury, something to be fought for and cherished, rather than a natural right. One of the more peculiar responses to this growing sleep crisis was the rise of the sleep expert. As insomnia became more prevalent, certain individuals, often with little formal medical training, began to market themselves as authorities on sleep. Some claimed to have discovered the secrets to the perfect night's rest, offering everything from specialized sleep chambers to restorative treatments. These so-called experts capitalized on the public's growing fear of sleep deprivation and its perceived connection to poor health. Their solutions were sometimes harmless, such as recommending more comfortable mattresses or advising a lighter diet before bed. But other treatments were more dubious, like expensive sleep masks or controversial electric sleep machines, which promised to shock the body into slumber. But it wasn't just individuals capitalizing on the sleep problem. The medical community itself began to take notice. As sleep disturbances became more widespread, doctors began to study the phenomenon more seriously. Some doctors, like Dr. William Gull, one of the first to explore sleep disorders, began to develop theories that insomnia was not just a result of poor lifestyle choices, but was rooted in deeper psychological and neurological issues. Gull believed that sleep disorders could be linked to anxiety, stress, and other emotional factors, which at the time was a groundbreaking idea. However, his theories were still in their infancy, and many of his contemporaries dismissed them. Despite the growing interest in sleep science, it wasn't until the early 20th century that real progress was made in understanding sleep and insomnia. But the Victorian period, with its focus on productivity and the industrialization of daily life, set the stage for these discoveries. The legacy of Victorian insomnia lies not only in the remedies they used, but in the way they began to understand sleep as a complex biological and psychological process. Though their understanding was imperfect, the Victorians were among the first to recognize that sleep was not simply a natural state, but something that could be influenced by society, by environment, and by individual struggles. As we look at the broader historical picture, the Industrial Revolution was undeniably a turning point in the way people thought about and experienced sleep. The pressures of modernity had arrived, and sleep, it seemed, was something that had to be fought for, rather than something that just happened. And for those who couldn't find it, there were countless remedies and ideas, many of which only added to the confusion. In the next section, we'll examine the birth of sleep clinics and specialized treatments as the medical community began to acknowledge the complexity of sleep disorders. As we move into the 20th century, the world of sleep medicine would begin to evolve, and the solutions would become more grounded in science. But for now, let's pause and appreciate how the Victorians tried, in their own way, to understand and conquer the elusive world of sleep. As we journey further into the world of Victorian sleep remedies, we begin to see how medical science, once in its infancy, began to slowly advance. The Industrial Revolution, with all its newfound technological developments, also paved the way for medical advancements that eventually brought more clarity to the mysterious world of sleep. As we've already seen, early treatments were rooted in guesswork, superstition, and a desperate need for relief, but now we begin to see the first glimmers of a more scientific approach to insomnia. One of the key developments in this area was the rise of sleep clinics and the establishment of specialized treatments for those suffering from chronic sleep disorders. By the end of the Victorian era, it became apparent that the field of sleep medicine needed a more systematic scientific approach. As physicians began to take insomnia more seriously, many started to study the effects of sleep deprivation on the body, as well as the potential causes of sleeplessness. Some early researchers in sleep medicine began to explore the link between mental health and sleep, considering that insomnia could be related to anxiety, depression, or other psychological factors. The understanding of sleep began to shift from being merely a physical issue to something deeply tied to the mind. Historians still argue whether the creation of the first sleep clinics in the early 20th century was the natural evolution of Victorian sleep science, or if it marked a significant departure from the old methods. It's clear, however, that the late Victorian period laid the groundwork for these future advancements. Sleep clinics began to appear in major cities, and with them came a new understanding of sleep disorders as more than just an inconvenience or an annoying aspect of life. Doctors were beginning to see sleep as a complex process, one that involved the body, mind, and environment. While sleep clinics were still relatively rare during the Victorian era, their emergence at the turn of the century marked the beginning of a more organized approach to treating insomnia. It was here that doctors began to use more structured methods to study sleep patterns, including keeping detailed records of patients' sleep behaviors and experimenting with various treatments. Some early sleep clinics used what we would now consider primitive versions of sleep studies, monitoring patients' sleep using rudimentary tools. They would track things like the time it took a person to fall asleep, the number of times they woke up during the night, and the total amount of sleep they received. The idea of measuring sleep scientifically, though in its infancy, was a revolutionary step forward. One of the most significant contributions to sleep medicine during the late Victorian period came from the study of sleep disorders related to the nervous system. With the rise of neurology as a medical specialty, doctors began to recognize that insomnia could be related to deeper neurological issues. Conditions like insomnia were no longer seen as simple matters of habit or lifestyle. They were now understood to have complex physiological and psychological roots. As a result, treatments became more tailored to the individual. In the past, a general prescription of laudanum might have been the solution for anyone suffering from sleeplessness. But now, with a deeper understanding of the body's nervous system, doctors could offer more nuanced advice, adjusting their treatments according to the specific needs of their patients. The early sleep clinics, though primitive by today's standards, were an important first step in recognizing sleep as a vital health issue, rather than a minor inconvenience. For the first time, doctors were systematically recording the way patients slept, and this marked the beginning of a new approach to understanding the connection between the brain, body, and sleep. They began to recognize that insomnia could be a symptom of other underlying health issues, such as heart disease or digestive problems, rather than simply being a standalone issue. But even as these early treatments emerged, the Victorians were still grappling with the deep-seated misconceptions surrounding sleep. It's fascinating to think that in an age of such rapid advancement in medicine, sleep was still considered somewhat of a mystery. Treatments like laudanum and herbal remedies were still in wide use, despite their lack of long-term effectiveness. The arrival of sleep clinics and scientific methods of treatment didn't immediately replace these older remedies. Instead, it marked a slow transition from relying on unproven methods to adopting more scientifically informed approaches. At the same time, many Victorians remained loyal to the traditional remedies and rituals that had served them for generations. People still turned to prayer and religious rituals for relief from insomnia, and many believed that their sleep troubles were not just physical but spiritual in nature. This overlap between the emerging scientific field and the deeply ingrained spiritual practices of the time is one of the most striking aspects of the Victorian struggle with insomnia. While the medical community began to chart a more rational path, the influence of religion, culture, and tradition remained powerful in shaping how people approached their sleepless nights. The influence of the Industrial Revolution also played a role in the creation of sleep clinics. As cities became more crowded and people worked longer hours, the demand for effective treatments for sleep disorders increased. It was during this period that doctors began to realize the full extent of how industrialization had affected the human body, including sleep patterns. The rise of the sleep clinic was a direct response to the social and environmental changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution. In a way, sleep clinics represented a new type of medical institution, one that acknowledged the complex relationship between modern life and health. As we close out this chapter of the story, it's important to reflect on how far we've come in our understanding of sleep. While we still have much to learn, the Victorian era represents the dawn of modern sleep medicine, even if that dawn was hazy and filled with more questions than answers. The struggle to understand insomnia, to find a cure for sleeplessness, was a reflection of the changing times filled with industrial growth, social upheaval, and medical experimentation. And though the Victorians didn't have the answers, their attempts to tackle the mysteries of sleep set the stage for the scientific breakthroughs that would follow. In the next section, we'll explore how the modern sleep treatments we take for granted today evolved from these early attempts. The 20th century would bring about a major shift in how we viewed and treated insomnia, one that would move us from the experimental to the empirical, laying the foundation for the science of sleep as we know it. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the scientific understanding of sleep began to evolve at a rapid pace, marking a turning point in how people treated insomnia. The Victorian era, with its reliance on potions, rituals, and early theories, laid the groundwork, but it was in the new century that real progress began to take shape. Sleep was no longer viewed merely as a state of unconsciousness or something to be cured with herbal remedies and opiates. Now, it was becoming a subject of serious study, and this shift would radically change how the world understood and treated sleep disorders. The birth of sleep clinics in the early 20th century marked a significant departure from the methods of the Victorian era. Unlike the patchwork of remedies used by the Victorians, these clinics focused on the scientific and clinical aspects of sleep. Medical professionals, now armed with better research tools and technologies, began systematically studying how and why people slept or failed to do so. What had once been a series of isolated attempts to induce sleep was now becoming a full-fledged field of medical study, sleep medicine. One of the most significant developments during this time was the growing awareness of the connection between sleep and mental health. While the Victorians had largely viewed insomnia as either a moral failing or a physical ailment to be cured with substances, the new wave of sleep experts saw it as a symptom of deeper psychological issues. Sleep problems were no longer dismissed as mere inconveniences. They were recognized as potential signals of anxiety, depression, and even neurological disorders. This shift in perspective was monumental, and it helped set the stage for more personalized and holistic treatments. In the early days of sleep research, a major breakthrough came with the introduction of the sleep study. Doctors began using techniques to monitor a patient's sleep patterns, often using simple tools like tracking their sleep cycles or observing when they woke during the night. The advent of electroencephalograms, EEGs, in the 1922nd allowed researchers to record brain activity during sleep. This technology, which measured electrical activity in the brain, was groundbreaking. For the first time, doctors could study the physiological processes that occurred during sleep. They were able to distinguish between different stages of sleep, such as deep sleep and rapid eye movement, REM, sleep, and observe how sleep cycles affected the body and mind. But despite these advancements, the road to better sleep treatment was still not without its bumps. In the early 20th century, many people still struggled to find effective solutions. The methods used to treat insomnia varied widely, and much of the advice was still grounded in outdated beliefs. Sleep medications were still in their infancy, and what was available often had side effects that could make the situation worse. Early sleeping pills, for instance, were sometimes simply stronger sedatives, which could cause drowsiness the following day, or even lead to addiction. In a way, the struggle that began in the Victorian era with opiates like laudanum continued into the 20th century, with new drugs offering some relief but also presenting new challenges. The widespread use of sedatives and other sleep aids continued, but doctors were beginning to recognize that simply knocking people out with medication wasn't enough. Real treatment required a deeper understanding of the patient's life, their emotional health, and their environment. Sleep experts began recommending behavioral changes, emphasizing the importance of good sleep hygiene, something we now take for granted, but which was a novel idea at the time. For example, sleep hygiene focused on establishing regular sleep schedules, creating a comfortable and dark sleep environment, and avoiding stimulants like caffeine or alcohol before bedtime. This shift toward behavioral therapies was a marked departure from the heavy reliance on drugs. By the mid-20th century, doctors were starting to recommend these more natural remedies, acknowledging that sleep could be improved not just with pills, but with changes in lifestyle. The treatment of insomnia also began to incorporate psychological therapies. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is now considered one of the most effective treatments for insomnia, was beginning to gain traction. CBT involves helping patients identify and change negative thoughts and behaviors that might be contributing to their sleep problems. By addressing the psychological aspects of sleep, patients were able to develop healthier sleep habits and reduce their anxiety around sleep, which in turn improved their ability to rest. Historians still debate how far ahead of its time the Victorian approach to insomnia really was. Did their reliance on opiates and herbal remedies hinder real progress, or did it spark the conversation that led to the modern understanding of sleep disorders? It's hard to say for sure. What is clear, however, is that the scientific study of sleep began to move forward in the 20th century at a pace that was impossible during the Victorian era. Advances in psychology, neurology, and medical technology helped transform sleep from a mysterious and often misunderstood problem into a field of study with evidence-based treatments. This era also saw the beginning of sleep clinics becoming more specialized. While the Victorian era physicians were often general practitioners, sleep experts in the 20th century were more likely to be neurologists, psychiatrists, or psychologists, people with specific training in the mechanisms of sleep. As the focus shifted to understanding the underlying causes of insomnia, medical professionals could offer a broader array of treatments, including medications, therapy, and lifestyle changes. In many ways, the birth of modern sleep medicine came out of the failures and misconceptions of the Victorian era. While the Victorians had laid the groundwork for understanding sleep through their treatments, their approach was often misguided or simply ineffective. By the time the 20th century rolled around, sleep was finally being understood as a complex biological and psychological process, with multiple factors contributing to the inability to rest. Sleep, it seemed, was no longer something to simply be treated with a potion or a pill. It was something to be studied, understood, and, with time, carefully managed. As we continue to move into the 20th century, we'll examine how sleep medicine evolved even further, with more technological advancements and new insights into the role of sleep in overall health. The journey from the Victorian era to the modern day is one of trial and error, experimentation, and, eventually, discovery. But the seeds for this progress were planted long before sleep clinics and EEG machines became common tools. They were planted in the minds of the Victorians, who struggled with insomnia just like we do today. In the next section, we'll look at how new methods of sleep therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, began to shape the future of sleep treatment, and how the 20th century finally moved us from the primitive to the scientific in terms of understanding insomnia. But first, let's pause and reflect on how, over time, sleep has moved from a mystery to a science, and how the search for rest remains as crucial as ever. As we continue our exploration of the evolution of sleep medicine, it's time to focus on one of the most significant shifts that occurred in the 20th century, the advent of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. This revolutionary approach marked a departure from the drug-heavy solutions of the past, offering a more sustainable, natural, and scientifically grounded method of tackling sleep disorders. While the Victorians had struggled with rudimentary remedies, the 20th century ushered in an era where understanding the mind's role in sleep became central to treatment. In the earlier days of sleep medicine, the focus was primarily on the physical side of sleep. Doctors prescribed sleeping pills, narcotics like laudanum, or even alcohol to help induce sleep, but these treatments were often short-term fixes that failed to address the root causes of insomnia. However, with the rise of behavioral psychology, the understanding of sleep began to change. Researchers started to realize that insomnia wasn't just a physical issue. It was deeply tied to the mental and emotional state of the individual. Stress, anxiety, depression, and poor sleep habits were all found to contribute to sleeplessness. This realization was key in the development of CBTI, which would go on to become one of the most effective and long-lasting treatments for insomnia. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia works by targeting the thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors that interfere with the natural process of falling asleep. It's based on the idea that our thoughts about sleep, such as worrying about how we'll never fall asleep or stressing about how tired we'll be the next day, can actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we worry about sleep, the harder it becomes to actually sleep. CBTI seeks to break this cycle by helping individuals change their mindset and habits surrounding sleep. The therapy focuses on teaching people how to relax, establish a consistent sleep routine, and create a sleep environment that promotes rest. It encourages patients to challenge their beliefs about sleep and overcome the anxiety that often accompanies it. One of the key elements of CBTI is sleep restriction, which involves limiting the time spent in bed to the actual amount of sleep a person is getting. The idea is that by restricting time in bed, the body will learn to associate the bed with sleep, rather than with lying awake. This process, which seems counterintuitive, helps to consolidate sleep and improve the overall quality of rest. Sleep restriction, along with stimulus control techniques, encourages patients to only use the bed for sleep and intimacy, no more watching television or reading in bed. This helps to break the association between the bed and wakefulness. Another key component of CBTI is relaxation training. Techniques such as deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and guided imagery are used to reduce the physical symptoms of stress and anxiety that contribute to insomnia. These relaxation techniques help to calm the nervous system, lower heart rate, and prepare the body for sleep. Over time, these practices help patients learn how to calm their minds and bodies, making it easier to fall asleep without the use of drugs or alcohol. The impact of CBTI cannot be overstated. This approach has been proven to be more effective than medication in many cases, with longer-lasting results. In fact, studies have shown that people who undergo CBTI experience improvements in sleep quality, mood, and overall well-being. It addresses the root cause of insomnia by focusing on the behavioral and cognitive aspects of the disorder, rather than just masking the symptoms with medication. As a result, CBTI has become the gold standard for treating insomnia, with a success rate that far exceeds the use of sleep aids or other medications. What's even more remarkable about CBTI is its widespread applicability. It works for people of all ages and backgrounds, and it has been shown to be particularly effective for those who suffer from chronic insomnia. While medication may offer a temporary fix, CBTI provides lasting results that don't rely on pills. This shift away from reliance on drugs to a more holistic, psychological approach is a defining characteristic of modern sleep treatment, and it's a far cry from the dangerous opiate-laden remedies used in the Victorian era, like laudanum, which often created more harm than good. However, despite the advances made in the treatment of insomnia through behavioral therapy, the cultural attitudes towards sleep and insomnia are still heavily influenced by the past. Many people still turn to quick fixes, like sleeping pills, when they struggle to sleep. The medical field continues to grapple with how best to balance the benefits of medications with the long-term advantages of non-pharmacological treatments. While medications may be necessary in certain cases, CBTI remains the most effective treatment for the majority of insomnia sufferers. But the conversation around sleep doesn't end with CBTI. As we look toward the future, there are new frontiers in sleep research that continue to shape how we understand and treat insomnia. Technological innovations, such as wearable sleep trackers and the development of personalized sleep programs, are helping to provide more tailored treatment options. With the rise of digital health tools, people can now track their sleep patterns in real time, providing valuable data that can help inform treatment strategies. One particularly exciting development is the growing interest in sleep apps and other digital tools that guide users through relaxation techniques, cognitive behavioral strategies, and sleep hygiene practices. These tools make it easier than ever to access sleep therapy, and they're especially useful for people who may not have access to a sleep clinic or a therapist. By incorporating elements of CBTI into these apps, users can practice the techniques that have been proven to improve sleep quality, all from the comfort of their own homes. In addition to digital tools, the increasing focus on sleep science as a whole is driving new discoveries in the field of sleep medicine. Researchers are exploring the complex relationship between sleep and brain function, and they're learning more about how different factors, like genetics, hormones, and environmental influences, affect our sleep patterns. This research is helping to uncover new treatments for insomnia and other sleep disorders, as well as providing deeper insights into the role sleep plays in overall health and well-being. In the next section, we'll explore how some of the groundbreaking research in sleep science is shaping the future of insomnia treatment and how it's influencing our understanding of the role sleep plays in our lives. From understanding sleep stages to discovering new therapies, the future of sleep medicine is brighter than ever. As we step further into the future of sleep science, it's important to examine how modern breakthroughs in research are revolutionizing the way we understand and treat insomnia. Over the past few decades, we've seen a shift from simply trying to manage sleep problems with medications to a more nuanced scientific approach that focuses on the underlying mechanisms of sleep and wakefulness. The future of sleep medicine promises to be an exciting one, with new therapies, technologies, and insights that are changing the landscape of how we approach sleep disorders. One of the most exciting developments in sleep research has been the study of sleep stages and how they affect our overall health. Scientists have long known that there are different stages of sleep ranging from light sleep to deep, restorative REM sleep, but only in recent years have they begun to understand the significance of these stages in greater detail. Today, sleep researchers are using advanced technologies, such as functional MRI scans and polysomnography, a type of sleep study, to track the brain's activity throughout the various stages of sleep. This cutting-edge technology allows scientists to observe how our brains process memories, regulate emotions, and repair the body during sleep. One of the most groundbreaking findings in sleep research is the discovery of the brain's glymphatic system, a waste clearance system that functions primarily during sleep. This system, which was first identified in 2012, helps clear harmful proteins and toxins from the brain proteins like beta amyloid, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease. Research has shown that deep sleep, slow-wave sleep, is critical for this waste-clearing process. Without sufficient deep sleep, the brain's ability to detoxify itself diminishes, which may contribute to cognitive decline over time. This discovery has led to a surge of interest in the role sleep plays in neurological health, and it's beginning to shape new approaches to preventing and treating neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Another exciting avenue of research is the study of sleep and mental health. We already know that insomnia is closely linked to conditions like anxiety and depression, but recent studies are revealing just how deeply the two are intertwined. Researchers are exploring how disruptions in sleep can worsen mental health issues, and conversely, how improving sleep can help alleviate symptoms of anxiety and depression. One of the major breakthroughs in this area is the recognition that poor sleep doesn't just result from mental health disorders. It can actually contribute to the development of these disorders. This has led to an increased focus on addressing sleep problems early on as part of a holistic approach to mental health care. The rise of sleep trackers and wearable technology has also contributed significantly to the field of sleep science. Devices like the Fitbit, Oura Ring, and Apple Watch have allowed millions of people to track their sleep patterns, providing valuable insights into their sleep quality and helping them identify areas that need improvement. These devices use sensors to monitor heart rate, movement, and even the stages of sleep, and they sync with apps that provide users with feedback on their sleep quality. While these trackers are still relatively basic compared to the advanced equipment used in sleep labs, they provide an accessible and practical way for people to take charge of their sleep health. The data collected by these wearables has also helped sleep researchers identify patterns and trends that were previously difficult to detect. For example, studies have shown that people who experience poor sleep quality are at a higher risk for developing chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. This has led to a greater understanding of the preventative health benefits of good sleep and how improving sleep can be a powerful tool in reducing the risk of developing serious health conditions. In the realm of sleep disorders, technology continues to advance with the introduction of new treatments and therapies. One such therapy that has gained significant attention is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, which, as we discussed earlier, is now considered one of the most effective non-pharmacological treatments for insomnia. But CBTI is just the beginning. With the increasing availability of online programs and apps, people can now access personalized sleep therapy from the comfort of their own homes. This makes the treatment accessible to a much broader audience, including those who may not have the time or resources to attend in-person therapy sessions. Apps that offer guided sleep meditation, relaxation exercises, and sleep education have become integral parts of modern sleep care. Perhaps the most exciting area of development is the use of artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning in the treatment of sleep disorders. AI is being integrated into sleep diagnostics, treatment planning, and therapy personalization. For example, AI-driven platforms are being used to analyze sleep data from wearables and sleep studies, helping doctors diagnose conditions like sleep apnea and insomnia more accurately. AI can also be used to create individualized treatment plans based on a person's sleep patterns, habits, and health conditions, which can lead to more tailored and effective treatments. Pharmacology continues to play a role in sleep medicine, but the focus has shifted away from using sedatives like laudanum and benzodiazepines as a quick fix. Modern sleep medications, such as melatonin supplements and orexin antagonists, are designed to work with the body's natural sleep-wake cycle, offering more sustainable and less addictive options. Researchers are also exploring new pharmacological treatments that target specific aspects of sleep, such as the regulation of sleep cycles and the promotion of deep sleep. These treatments promise to offer more effective and less harmful options for those who still struggle with sleep despite behavioral interventions. As we look toward the future, it's clear that the field of sleep science will continue to evolve, offering new ways to improve the quality of our sleep and our overall health. The research into sleep and its connection to mental and physical health is already changing how we approach insomnia and other sleep disorders, and the next few decades promise even more exciting discoveries. What started as a mysterious and often misunderstood aspect of human biology has now become one of the most dynamic and rapidly advancing areas of medical research. The future of sleep medicine holds incredible potential for improving lives, enhancing well-being, and even preventing disease. In the next section, we'll wrap up our journey through the history of insomnia and sleep treatments, reflecting on how far we've come since the Victorian era and what the future holds. From opium to sleep trackers, from religious rituals to sleep clinics, the journey of sleep medicine is a fascinating one, and it's only just beginning. As we approach the final chapter of our journey through the history of insomnia and sleep treatments, it's time to reflect on how far we've come since the days of the Victorians, whose struggles with sleep led to a fascinating array of remedies, many of which seem strange or even dangerous by today's standards. From opiates like laudanum to bizarre electric machines, their attempts to conquer sleeplessness were as varied as they were desperate. But despite the many misguided attempts, their efforts set the stage for the groundbreaking developments we see in sleep medicine today. The story of sleep in the Victorian era is one of experimentation, confusion, and in many cases, hope. The widespread use of opiates, the reliance on herbal remedies, and the belief in spiritual solutions reflect the Victorian obsession with sleep as a vital part of health and well-being. Yet, for all their struggles, the Victorians never truly understood the complexity of sleep as we do now. What they didn't have were the tools, the technology, and the scientific framework necessary to unravel the mysteries of sleep. But they were the pioneers in this battle, laying the groundwork for future generations to build upon. When we look at the 20th century and the rise of sleep clinics, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, and the integration of technology in sleep research, it's clear that we are no longer operating in the dark. Today, we understand that sleep is not just a passive activity, but an active process crucial to our physical and mental health. We know that the right amount of sleep improves memory, helps regulate emotions, and supports our immune system. Sleep is no longer a luxury or a mystery, but an essential part of a healthy lifestyle. We've also learned that insomnia, far from being a moral failure or a simple inconvenience, is a complex condition with many potential causes. Stress, anxiety, depression, physical illness, and even environmental factors like light pollution and noise can all contribute to a person's inability to sleep. Modern medicine has moved away from treating sleep as just a symptom of a larger problem and instead focuses on understanding the underlying causes and providing personalized, evidence-based treatments. Whether it's through cognitive therapy, medications, or behavioral changes, the treatments available today are far more effective than the potions and pills of the past. In some ways, the modern sleep movement mirrors the story of the Victorian era. The Victorians may have relied on opiates and alcohol to manage their insomnia, but today we have sleep trackers, digital apps, and wearable devices that provide real-time data about our sleep patterns. These tools allow us to take control of our sleep health in ways the Victorians could never have imagined. Technology is helping to usher in a new era of sleep care, one that is personalized, accessible, and data-driven. Moreover, the impact of sleep on mental and physical health is now a key focus in sleep research. As we discussed earlier, we now know that poor sleep is linked to a range of health problems, from heart disease and diabetes to mental health disorders like depression and anxiety. Sleep is no longer viewed as just a time for rest. It is a critical period during which the body and mind repair themselves. This understanding has led to a more holistic approach to insomnia treatment, focusing not just on the symptoms of sleep deprivation but also on the broader aspects of a person's well-being. And while modern treatments, from cognitive behavioral therapy to pharmacological interventions, have proven effective, the need for sleep hygiene remains paramount. As we saw in the Victorian era, environmental factors like light and noise can severely disrupt sleep, and even today, people struggle with finding ways to create the ideal sleep environment. This is why simple strategies like limiting screen time before bed, creating a quiet, dark room, and maintaining a consistent sleep schedule continue to be cornerstones of modern sleep care. Looking forward, the future of sleep medicine is incredibly promising. With the continued advancement of artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning, we can expect more personalized treatments for sleep disorders that are based on individual sleep data, health histories, and lifestyle habits. AI-powered platforms are already helping patients track their sleep patterns and receive customized treatment recommendations. The integration of sleep research with other fields, like genetics and neuroscience, promises to offer even deeper insights into why some people are more prone to insomnia than others and how to treat it more effectively. One of the most exciting areas of sleep research is the study of the brain's sleep-wake cycles and how they affect cognitive functions like learning and memory. Scientists are discovering that our sleep patterns may be directly linked to how well we retain information and solve problems. This is leading to a new understanding of the importance of deep sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, in cognitive health. As more is learned about how sleep supports brain function, we may find even more effective treatments for conditions like memory loss, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. Of course, sleep is not a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person may not work for another, and this is where modern sleep medicine has truly excelled. Today's treatments are far more individualized and based on a thorough understanding of each person's unique sleep needs. The recognition that insomnia is not just a disorder of the body, but one that involves the mind, emotions, and environment, has opened up new avenues for treatment that go beyond just taking a pill before bed. As we reflect on the long history of insomnia and its treatments, From the opium-laced potions of the Victorians to the sophisticated sleep clinics of today, we can see that the journey has been a long and winding one. While the road to understanding sleep has been paved with trial and error, each step has brought us closer to solving one of the most universal problems humanity faces. And though we may still have much to learn, we've come a long way from the days when a poor night's sleep could only be fixed by swallowing a bitter, addictive tonic. Now, as we end our exploration of this fascinating subject, let's pause and reflect on how far we've come in our understanding of sleep and insomnia. The Victorians, in their own way, helped illuminate a path that led us to modern sleep medicine. And while we may not be free of sleep problems just yet, the future looks brighter than ever. With continued research, personalized treatments, and technological advancements, we are better equipped than ever to ensure that we all get the rest we deserve. So, take a deep breath, relax, and remember that sleep, though sometimes elusive, is never truly beyond our reach. Whether you're battling insomnia or simply looking for a peaceful night's rest, the journey towards better sleep has never been more promising. As we slowly reach the end of this journey through the history of sleep, it's fascinating to look back and realize how far we've come. What once was a confusing maze of potions, prayers, and uncertain remedies has evolved into a science, a field dedicated to helping millions sleep better and live healthier. From the desperate attempts of the Victorians to the breakthroughs of the 20th century, we've seen how society's understanding of sleep has grown from being a mere necessity to something intricately connected to mental, emotional, and physical health. The rise of sleep clinics, cognitive behavioral therapy, and wearable devices are just a few examples of how far sleep medicine has come. The journey from opium-laced remedies to personalized data-driven sleep treatments reflects not only advancements in medical science but also a deeper understanding of what makes us human. Sleep, as it turns out, is not just a time to rest, it's a critical period of recovery, restoration, and memory consolidation, something that shapes our overall well-being in ways we are only beginning to fully appreciate. The future holds even more exciting possibilities for sleep science. From AI-powered sleep trackers to the unraveling mysteries of the brain's role in sleep, there is much to look forward to. But as we close this chapter, it's important to remember that the key to good sleep isn't always found in a pill or a gadget. Sometimes it's as simple as creating a peaceful environment, fostering good habits, and understanding our own body's needs. So, as you lie back, take a slow, deep breath and let the gentle rhythm of your breath carry you into a calm, restful sleep. There's no need to worry about what tomorrow holds tonight. We rest, knowing that the world of sleep is in capable hands, with research and technology guiding us toward a healthier, more restful future.